Greetings and welcome to Georgian Crossroads. This is Byrne Power, your host from Tbilisi, Georgia. I'm an American who's been living here over 3 years now, 3.5 years. And one of the things I have had plenty of chance to think about since then is the differences between Georgians and Americans. And so I thought what I would do today is do a not too long video about the differences that I've noticed in my time here. By the way, before I begin, if you like this video, subscribe, share it. I'd like to get more subscribers on this channel. And I am going to start doing something fairly soon where I offer Georgian music in response to people who donate to the channel. There is a PayPal link below. So, but I'll discuss that maybe in a week or so. Meanwhile, let's continue on. Well, let's begin actually and discuss the differences between Georgians and Americans. I'm not talking about the differences between Georgia and America. And Georgia, by the way, if you're an American, I'm not talking about the state. But I'm talking about the way people act. And this could be a Georgian going to an American situation or an American coming to Georgia. But it's really just contrasting, and there are differences and similarities. And we'll talk about those. First of all, let's discuss space, personal space. Whether walking or driving or sitting, this is one of the hugest differences between Georgians and Americans. And I'm going to say this in more than one video, because the more I see it, the more I see it as a major difference. Now, this is a major difference not only with Georgians, but with Europeans in general. But specifically with Georgians, I often say the French have a personal space of about this far. Georgians have none. Americans have about this much. And that's a big deal, which means Americans, if you get in there inside that space, which a Georgian would, an American can become very nervous, and especially in America, but also just traveling. Dear American friends, do learn how to adjust to different senses of space in the world, by the way. But just when walking down the street, an American keeps that much space around them at all times. And they also have 360-degree peripheral vision. Not that they actually see 360 degrees, but they're aware of what's directly behind them. Georgians, to my knowledge, are not. Which means Georgians may be walking down the street and all of a sudden stop, regardless of the fact that you're right behind them. I've actually seen Georgians go to the top. There's a 2-minute long escalator at the Rustaveli metro station, Rustavelis metro. And they will stop at the absolute top of the escalator, right as you step off. They'll stop right there. I've seen this happen. So when I get on the escalator, I put at least 3 steps between me and them because they don't think about the people behind them. I'm sorry to say it, Georgians, but that is the way it is. Georgians will bump into you. You know, there are words for excuse me, but it's not general. To say bodishi, which is more like I'm sorry. You've escalated to the point where you need to apologize. Prior to that, there's not much of a word for it. And I think this all has to do with personal space. With driving, it's even worse. I've seen Georgians here in Tbilisi who will be completely, what should I say? They'll just kind of keep sliding in. They'll get within like this close to your car and just keep going and going and going. Unless they sense that if they sense you're going to stop, they'll just keep going. I often think Georgians are a bit like sharks. And what I mean by this is supposedly the shark can't stop swimming or they'll die. Georgians can't stop moving. They just keep moving and moving and moving. And I think this says something about personal relationships too. But when I've driven here, and I have borrowed cars and driven here in Tbilisi, and driving in Tbilisi is far stranger than driving out of the country. It takes me 45 minutes to get out of the city. But once I'm out of the city, it's a breeze to drive here. But it's the city driving that's nuts. But what I've done is I used to live in New York City. I used to do delivery of artwork in New York City for 3 years. So I used to have to take a large van and drive through thin, narrow streets. And in New York, you don't give an inch. And that's what I apply as soon as I drive here. I just kind of like, no, sorry, you're not getting in. Don't even think about it, pal. And the Georgians kind of take the hint, and they don't get in my way. Although you can tell they want it. If they sense any hesitation at all, no hesitation. But this space, I want, as an American, I want that kind of space. It just feels comfortable. It's like I'm walking in the world alone. And we'll talk about this a little bit more at the end. What this relates to is individuality. I'm an American, I have my rights, I have my space, which can be a real problem for Americans, especially when we want to adjust to anywhere else in the world that isn't like that.
Spread out.
For instance, Georgians will cut you off walking or driving. They will simply not notice you. They're like front focused always, but they're never back focused. But nevertheless, with all the cars doing crazy things and all the people doing crazy things, they somehow manage with it's not like they don't have problems and accidents and bump into each other in cars and stuff. But it's much less than you would think because of the shark principle. They just keep moving. They just keep adjusting themselves. So it makes them kind of agile in a way Americans aren't. The way I notice it is that Georgians tend to treat everyone in Georgia the way you treat people in a family. Nobody apologizes if someone gets to the bathroom before someone else. They just simply, I beat you. It's like, that's how it is. And that's how it is here. Walking down the street. No one apologizes if they cut you off or anything. It's kind of like we're all in this together. Why would you need to apologize? This is huge too, is time. So space and time in Georgia are very different things. And by time, I mean arriving, getting things done, starting the day. For instance, there is no breakfast culture here. I mean, not among Georgians. There are expats who find hotels or restaurants that will serve them, 10 o'clock in the morning. At 6 a.m. here, nothing is happening. There's a few people exercising in the park. That's it. At 7 o'clock, nothing is happening. There's a few people on their way to school or thinking about it, and a few people exercising in the park. At 10 o'clock, everything is 10 o'clock is 8 o'clock in most other places. New York City, their 10 o'clock is like New York City's 7 o'clock in the morning. They say, in America, we often compare ourselves to Mexico, and we say, the Mexican sense of time is slower, more relaxed. Whereas I would say the Georgian sense of time isn't slower, it's erratic. That is to say, sometimes it's very slow, relaxed. The next minute, everything has to be done quickly because we put it off too long. And I've experienced this personally while working here. It's just this weird sense of, it's like starts and really like lots of action, and then it slows down again. If I invite a Georgian over at, say, 7 o'clock at night, I don't expect a Georgian at 7 o'clock at night. If they arrive at 8, that's on time. So if I want to get them there at 7, I might say 5 or 6. Because that's just Georgians. And I had a good friend of mine, Sandro, and I said to him, so how come Georgians hardly apologize when they're late for things? And he goes, he goes, well, with friends, you don't really need to apologize. Which, of course, is exactly the opposite in America. If you want to keep your friendship in America, you're polite, you apologize, things like that. Whereas in Georgia, it's just assumed we're friends. So, it's not that big a deal, which I find very interesting. But that's a different kind of an area, which I might mention a little more. But still, let's talk about openness now. Now, this is actually an area in which Georgians and Americans are very similar compared to other cultures, compared to, say, the French or the Germans or even the English. Georgians are extremely open when they first meet you. Not walking down the street. Now, Americans, depending on where you are, will be open to you walking down the street. Not in New York City, obviously. Not in Los Angeles. But in your average American town, there is an openness to Americans. One of the things that often shocks people who are Europeans about going to America is just like people will just start talking to you. You're in line at the grocery store and the cashier starts talking to you, which doesn't happen in Germany, doesn't happen in France. But here on the outer fringes of Europe, in Georgia, it can kind of happen like that. One thing I've noticed is that when I first started meeting Georgians in public, in public places, they'll be kind of like, they won't notice you, and then when they do, it's kind of like they're bright. The lights all go on. It's like, ooh, I tend to look at Georgians as being, we talk about xenophobia, the fear of outsiders. Well, Georgians are xenophilic. The people they save their fear for are other Georgians. But basically, they're open. They'll invite you to places. They'll do things for you. Up to a point. And this is similar to Americans. Americans also will be very open. And what I like to say to people is that Americans are very good at introductions, not so good at follow-up. When I first arrived in Alaska and lived there, the Alaskans were very open to talking and would invite me to dinner all the time. After a while, I realized, okay, a lot of these people I'm having dinner with, I don't necessarily share anything or that much in common with. So let's back off on the invitations and let's reorganize this. Well, it's not quite the same here in Georgia. And here, the problem is that the Georgian family structure, also the fact that it is not a rich country, so many people have 2 or 3 jobs, it makes it difficult. I mean, you'll get invited to a supper here or a get-together there, or maybe an event. But as far as getting into the family life, that takes some time. And even then, getting once invited doesn't mean you're invited all the time. In America, the big question is, what family? They're so broken and atomized in a way that's not true here. Okay. The fear of danger. This is an interesting thing. Americans have over time, the Alaskans are kind of like the older Americans who were very hospitable when they met you. Overly so, because they had to prove that you were safe. This is especially true in the Wild West. You had to be really friendly, because if you weren't friendly, you're possibly really dangerous. So Americans have this fear of danger. I certainly experienced this living in New York City, but the average American, for instance, in Juneau, Alaska, after September 11th, a place very far removed from having any sort of people with ill intent, terrorists, coming to through the airport there, they were much worse in inspecting your stuff than New York City was. Because there's this paranoia that starts to, it's just, when I said to people, I remember talking to one Alaskan woman saying, I'm going to France. And she goes, well, be careful. And I'm sitting there going like, I live in Alaska. People die here all the time of, accidents and all sorts of stuff here. What do you mean? Would you tell me that if I was going to Chicago? Because Europe's a lot safer than America. By degrees, many degrees safer. I'm pretty sure that fewer people die in most of Europe altogether than die in the city of Chicago or New Orleans in a year, or Detroit or Baltimore or even New York City. These places have a lot of deaths, which does lead me. There was an unfortunate incident about 1.5 years ago where. Maybe it was 2 years ago. Yeah, it was about 2 years ago, where an Australian woman was murdered up on a trail on the mountainside, the one I really like. And the expats, the people from other countries, particularly Europe and America, started going, oh my goodness, Tbilisi is changing. It's not what it used to be. I'm sitting there going, there hasn't been another murder like that since then. And there wasn't before then for ages. That was an anomaly, which is why everyone heard about it. But I responded on a Facebook message. It's just like, I used to live in New York City in the 80s. That was like once a week, or more. And yet that didn't stop anyone from coming to New York City. But there isn't that kind of danger here. A person can walk around here. I have a friend of mine, lovely girl, Sophia. She walks through the streets of Tbilisi at like 2 a.m. through dark corners that no woman in so many of the cities of the Western world would dare to do, because it's so safe here. So Georgians basically don't have a fear of, they're not afraid of crime. They're not afraid of rules. They break rules all the time. The way it works here is, in some countries, it's like, if the government says so, you have to do it. Well, here, the mask mandates always seem to follow what people were actually doing, not the other way around. It wasn't the government saying, now you have to do this. There was a period that it was like that and there were fines. But when the masks started to come off, first you'd see it on the streets. One by one, people were wearing less and less masks. And then finally the government said, you don't have to wear a mask in public, but you have to still wear them in stores. So then you started seeing people in stores not wearing them. So the government eventually said, now you don't have to wear them in stores, except in pharmacies and hospitals. And now you hardly see them in any of those places. So that is a very crucial aspect of living here, that people aren't really bothered by stuff. Consequently, Georgians have, for instance, lots of deaths by accident, falling off of roofs while making repairs, because the Americans get hyper safety focused, but the Georgians really don't. So let's talk about messages sent and business, things related to email, text messages, replying to messages. Georgians do it when they want. For instance, Americans will literally, I heard of someone recently who lost a job because an email was sent to them in the morning for something they were replying to. They lost their job as a result of that. So that's America. America wants, you send a message, email, text, whatever, and wham, they expect an instant return. In Georgia, if I send an email or a text message, I don't expect an instant return. And it's funny, on Facebook, I can send someone a message, then a day later, they will reply. I will see them, the green dot is on, I will reply, and then they don't reply to that for like another day or two, or we'll miss the message. It's like, as an American, I'm saying, don't you look at this, but Georgians just have a more relaxed attitude about a lot of things. Not everything, but about a lot of things. So when it comes to the next thing, social media, they use Facebook very differently than America. In America, you hear all these jokes about Facebook being passé. Facebook is, just for old folks and such. Not here. In Georgia, Facebook, I have a friend who said, I had to get on Facebook to communicate with all my friends here. And for instance, if I put an album of photos of the Arisioni dancers on my photo album page, on Facebook, if I go and look again in a couple of days, I'll have 1,000 likes. And then I have all these friends who aren't really friends, but they're people related to the people who are there, or fans of the dancers, or whatever. So Facebook here is used, I would say, more tribally. It's like tribal communication in a way that Americans just don't use it. You really have to hit the likes and stuff on people's pages. It's your way of showing you're still connected. Now, theoretically, that's how it works in America, but it really doesn't. It's interesting, though. If I talk to them about YouTube and how they could make money from it, they don't get it. There are probably some YouTubers here who do get it, but most of the Georgians here, when I've suggested this, they just don't quite get it. And they could really use the money because their money isn't that valuable, although, oddly enough, it's been going up against the dollar when the dollar has been strong. It's another story. But they just, well, this could also relate to the fact that, next point, there are no geeks here. I mean, there may be one or two somewhere, people who live for Marvel or, Star Wars or something. But in comparison to the Western world, in comparison to America, none. And I find that breath of fresh air. Because in America, it's become, someone once said, if you ask an American, where India is, they will not be able to tell you. They'll say, I don't know, South America. That's actually an answer that was given once. And Americans famously don't know anything about geography. But ask them, what do you think about the geography of Westeros in the Game of Thrones? It's a little passé now, but you get the point. Ask them about a fictional kingdom that suddenly, people are living for, the Star Wars universe or something, and they'll know everything about it, which as an American, I find scary. I find that scary that we know more about fictional worlds than we do our own.
Do you know who fought in the Civil War?
Who fought in the Civil War? Fuck. Like from the president?
No, like who against who?
It was the Nazis versus Germany. No. Yes. No. I'm gonna say yes, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes. You actually just guessed that?
Nah, yeah. I'm kind of smart.
You didn't know that? Oh. Did they teach you that in school or what?
They taught me it, but I just guessed it now, but
yeah, so
it's like I forgot, but
yeah, it was probably in the back of your head and like it came up.
Yeah.
How many Kardashian sisters can you name?
Kendall Jenner, Kylie Jenner, Kim Kardashian, Khloe Kardashian, Kourtney Kardashian. Is that all? That's all.
Yeah, that's all of them for sure.
Smart.
Yeah,
and that is a problem. Whereas the Georgians tend to go, they have these movies, they have video games. Like, for instance, if they go to the most recent Marvel movie, they'll come out of it and go like, oh, I liked it or I didn't like it. They don't then go on and join online channels and share endless memes about these things. They don't live in these worlds. So I'm so glad to be in a place without geeks, and because I find living in those fictional worlds to be highly problematic. But I talk more about this stuff on my other channel. And now I love horror stories, horror films, horror art, horror comic books. I'm not really a geek about it. I just find it actually one of the more philosophical genres to be interested in. Georgians will go see horror films and such. But when I ask, well, are there any writers who wrote horror stories here? No. Have Georgians made any horror films? Not really. I mean, there may be one or two somewhere that I haven't seen. Do they read horror literature? Yeah, they'll read, Stephen King in translation or whatever, but it's not something they write or do. And when I ask why, the answer seems to be, look at our history. It's kind of horrible enough. And indeed it is. You don't need to go very far back in Georgia today to get to some dark times. And I think that makes a difference, where in the West, the horror seems to circulate, for instance, around a loss of religion. Whereas here, they aren't at that stage yet. Even the people who aren't Christians here have a respect for religion. Not always. There are some people who say, I hate the church and such, but they still have a respect. They wouldn't go out and just try to, do some sort of strange activism against religion. So I think those two things are very much connected. Politics does not fall into the predictable American or even Western categories here. So I would find people here who were perfectly nice people who thought Donald Trump was really great, not realizing what a divisive figure he is in America. And many of them would say, oh, okay, Obama was pretty cool. They liked George W. Bush. They probably liked Obama a little less on whole. But it wasn't because he was black. It was because he didn't do as much for Georgia. Whereas George W. Bush did a lot for Georgia. They even have a huge highway named after him here. Nothing like that for Trump, because he didn't do that much for Georgia. But they had a sense that he would protect them more. Biden is like a ghost to them. He doesn't even register on as, is he a president? I heard the same thing in the Czech Republic. It's like, oh, I forgot who your president was. That's Joe Biden. But you'll find people with political opinions here about their own stuff that make you wonder where they're coming from. If you come here as an American, much better to talk about American politics and be open to things you don't, their responses to you are not going to be what you expect. If you're expecting let's everyone hate on Trump or Obama or whatever, whoever you don't like, let's all be against the Democrats or the Republicans, they're not going to act like that. They've got their own fish to fry. Politics you don't know anything about, and I wouldn't suggest having an opinion about it, not unless you've been here for quite a while. I don't feel like I have much of an opinion about it because it's too complicated for me. And if you're just visiting here or even an expat for a while, stay away from Georgian politics because quite literally you don't know. And unless you know the language, that's probably a good place to where you can have an opinion. If you know the language, I'd say then you can have an opinion, which is really tough. And I know quite a few Americans here who violate that principle, but that's my feeling. And finally, let's just talk about individuality. One of the big problems in America now is what some people call the sacred self, that the individual and what the individual wants is more important than anything collective. And by anything collective, I mean the family, larger groupings like extended families, regions, cities, states, country. That what an individual wants is the most important thing. In Georgia, it's just the opposite. The individual in the Western conception is coming here. More and more people want to fulfill the dream. The Disney princess motif is certainly here, at least on the screen. But the Georgians still feel very connected to, as I had it explained to me, first you have your family, then you have your friends who often you've grown up with, then you have your clan or region. So for instance, people from Migralia often are very loyal to other Migralians before they're loyal to the country. But in the end, they're all Georgians. And if anyone attacks Georgia, the clan loyalty goes aside for a moment. And then they're Georgians first. But here's the thing. I remember I had this one moment in the metro here. Now in New York City, one of the things is, if you step over that line, it's about this long between yourself and the edge of the platform, you kind of do that with some trepidation. But I was stepping over the line, just kind of looking down to see if the train was coming. And then suddenly I had the New York vibe. I said, ooh, one of the reasons you don't step over that line isn't because you're worried about falling into the train. It's because you're worried about some nut from behind you, some crazy person, someone filled with hatred, who's just going to push you into the line of the train. This happens in New York City. And then suddenly I looked, and I saw the Georgians' faces, and I said, none of these people are going to push me into the train. And I started thinking about it. Why? Why is there no sense of insanity here? Because I looked around and I thought, and I've been here for 3.5 years now. Where are the crazy people living on the streets? In the entire time, I've seen 3 relatively safe crazy people. I mean, pretty safe. I wasn't worried about them at all. In the entire time I've been here on the streets, we have 1 million, maybe 300,000 people here. Never seen that many crazy people or dangerous people in the metros, people who look like they're part of a gang or something. Yeah, they may be here. There are some gangs. But, and I thought, why are people in America so crazy? And we do have a high rate of mental instability in America. We have a high rate of people who are just mad all the time, and mad in both senses, both angry and insane. Why do we have that in America so much? And I thought to myself, it's because people come to New York City alone. And it starts to get to them. I started to feel it myself about halfway through my 16 years in New York City. This sense that you're isolated. Yeah, you have friends and stuff, but they're all in the same place. The one thing most people don't have in New York City who come there, not the New Yorkers themselves who live there, but the people who come there, is they don't have family. Where here, everyone knows where their family is. And most people, their family is here. If not, they know exactly where their family is. And that does something to you, knowing that where your relatives are, that they're all here, that you still have to live in the world of families and extended families and friends, and that you have responsibilities to them. And that's a whole area. I would say that family life, language, and some other things food is something for another video. But we'll stop there. There are, the one place in which the Georgians and Americans are most similar is an initial openness to people. And I would say the place in which they're most different is in the idea of the sacred self, that what I want supersedes all other boundaries, versus the Georgian sense of connection and responsibility to family, friends, clan, etc., and the country. So, thanks for joining me today. I hope you got something out of that. And if you feel like subscribing, do that. Share this if you want. And to my Georgian friends, I say Didi Madloba and Droebit. And to my American friends, I say, okay, we will be back again with Georgian Crossroads. And we've got a few more Prague diaries to get out of the way, but I'll try to throw more Georgian stuff in between. And then I'm going to Germany to give a lecture at the end of August. I'm sure I'll have something from that as well. So I'm using this, besides my Georgian channel, also for my travel channel. So, take care. Nachwamdis, Droebit. That was interesting, wasn't it?